Hello, everyone. We are going to get started in just 30 seconds. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are going to get started in just about 15 seconds here. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Indiana Youth Institute's webinar. Today's topic is Stop the Trauma, a call to action on trauma-informed care for youth. My name is Joshua Long. I'm the Senior Educational Content Manager here at IYI. We are so glad that you've joined us for today's presentation, and we are grateful to have the chance to connect as a community of Indiana youth workers that remain committed to meeting the needs of our youth and children. For those that are not familiar with IYI, our mission is to improve the lives of all Indiana children by strengthening and connecting the people, organizations, and communities that are focused on kids and youth. Listed here, you can see our vision that drives the work we do for Indiana youth, as well as our mission. And so with that, before we begin, I'm just going to share a couple of pointers that will help you engage in today's webinar. For any technical support issues, use the chat feature to send a message, and Aaron Whitcomb, IYI's registration manager, is behind the scenes to assist you. Use this feature to converse with the group as well. We also are very encouraging of asking questions, so please use the Q&A feature for any that you may have, and we will get to as many as we possibly can at the end of the session. Also, if you see a question that someone asked that you really like, you are able to upvote it, and I will make sure to ask the most upvoted questions first. Later today, you will receive an email with a link to complete an evaluation of this webinar. Please take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts about today's presentation. If you don't receive the evaluation email, please check your junk emails that may have been directed there. And once you complete the evaluation, you will be redirected to your certificate of participation. So just to say that one more time, if you are needing a certificate of participation, the only way to get that is to fill out the evaluation. Like all of IYI's webinars, today's webinar will be posted on our website if you'd like to revisit a portion later or share the opportunity to listen in with partners. And so with that, I am going to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Lori Goss-Reeves is a professor of social work at Indiana Wesleyan University and the director of field placement. Prior to joining the facility at IWU, she worked as a licensed clinical social worker at the Family Service Society for 24 years. Her experience serving families in the area of child welfare, juvenile justice, intellectual disabilities, and school-based services taught her the importance of advocacy and the impact of trauma. Dr. Goss-Reeves is passionate about the welfare of vulnerable children. She serves on the Prevent Child Abuse Council of Grant County and the Grant County Protection Team. She was recently elected as the state representative for District 31 for the state of Indiana. Dr. Goss-Reeves is married to a cartoonist, Eric Reeves, who draws the High and Lowest comic strip. Together, they raised 5 children, relying on a sense of humor to lead the way. Their 5 grandchildren fill their lives with immense joy. And so with that, we are very much looking forward to today's presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Goss-Reeves.
Good afternoon. I am so thankful for the opportunity to be with you today. The idea of this presentation came to me a long time ago. I was very fortunate to be able to early on get training in the impact of trauma. And I continued as a licensed clinical social worker trying to implement that knowledge, that information into the treatment that I was doing with families and children. And what I kept thinking of as I worked with these individuals is that we can do good work. You can do great work with children, with families, to help repair some of the emotional challenges that come with exposure to trauma. But repeated trauma seems to have an impact that at least as a licensed clinical social worker, it felt like I was pretty inadequate and unable to really help someone when the trauma was continuing or the exposure to the trauma was ongoing. So out of that, a this presentation. Joshua and I practiced ahead of time, and I want to share my screen with you, but right now I'm not seeing it. So let me see if, oh, there we go. There we go. So here we go. So what I really want to focus on mostly today is a call to action on the trauma-informed care for youth. What we know, and brain research is really good at equipping us with this information, that it's not just us saying we have to stop the trauma. It is actually research that is telling us that our brains over time, right? That our brain development is shaped by the interaction between genetics and experience. That social, emotional, and cognitive development are highly interrelated. That the brain architecture and the skills are built in this hierarchical, bottom-up sequence, and that brain plasticity and the ability to change behavior decreases over time, but the pathways remain open. And you see at the bottom, I've quoted a great article from Shonkoff, 2006, where you could read much more about
Dr.
this.
Goss-Reeves, you have to share your
Yes.
screen. I don't think you're sharing it yet.
I'm not sharing. Uh-oh. Okay.
I think your slide deck is up, but I think you have to hit share.
Okay.
There we go. Now it's showing Zoom, so I think you just have to toggle over to the PowerPoint.
I apologize, guys. We did practice and all was going well.
That is okay. If you scroll down, you should be able, there we go. There it is.
I apologize. Okay, we're going to scroll through. We practiced this so much for practice, right? Practice doesn't make it easier. It just doesn't make it perfect. Here we go. So today, as what I wanted to share with you is this call to action. So what we know is that brains are built over time, shaped by the interaction between genetics and experience. And I have to tell you, as a licensed clinical social worker, I often thought, boy, I wish I just knew the impact of the genetics, but oftentimes we don't. And so we have to rely on what we know is happening within families, within the life of a child, within the experiences that they're having. And so social, emotional, and cognitive development are interrelated. We know that to be true. And that our brains are still developing. I have a son who is 28. He has autism and Down syndrome. And I remember early on, he was born in 1995, learning the brain is very placid from 0 to 5. And that those pathways can still be impacted later on, but it just gets harder. And so I'm very strong proponent on 0 to 5 and the good work that's being done as we look at the importance of early childhood intervention and early education. But I want to go back to the slide. This brain plasticity, as I talked about, that the pathways do remain open, and that's encouraging. But we know that because of the brain development, children are very vulnerable to the effects of trauma early in their life, and that is because their brain development is still in progress. Early childhood experiences can have a lifelong effect. Research on the biology of stress tells us that when stressful events persist or recur frequently, the level of the stress hormone or the cortisol in the body becomes elevated, which interferes with healthy brain development. Exposure to trauma can lead to changes in the amygdala and the hippocampus. And those are responsible for the emotional regulation and our survival instinct. Definition of trauma, according to the DSM-5, is that exposure to the actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Direct trauma exposure, witnessing trauma, or learning about trauma that happened to a close friend or relative. These are all part of the definition. We know that the definition doesn't encompass everything. Some examples, though, would be motor vehicle accidents, bullying, terrorism, exposure to war, child maltreatment, exposure to domestic violence, and exposure to community violence. I remember when I learned this, that I thought I needed to share this with parents. I worked with children in the schools and saw that, some of them were living in homes where there was domestic violence. And I thought if I could just have access to the parents and share with the parents that not only is this violence in the home impacting you as the parent, but it is affecting the development of your child. And if we can help parents in some way understand in layman's terms, the simple fact that this exposure is impacting the development of their child's brain, that might create an urgency to get help, to get support, and to find a way to live in a home where the violence is no longer present. Childhood traumas, particularly those that are interpersonal, intentional, and chronic, are associated with greater rates for PTSD, PTSS, depression, and anxiety, antisocial behaviors, and a greater risk for alcohol and substance use disorders. Again, an excellent article cited by DeBellis and Zisk. I encourage you to read that. It is really, really good. So we want to look now at the traumatic experience. There are 3 types: acute, chronic, and complex. We know that we're all at risk for acute trauma, a single event that happens for a limited time. And as in the beginning, as I talked, that is what I feel like we as treatment providers can do a really good job of helping an individual with that. Chronic trauma are multiple events, often over a long period of time. And complex trauma are multiple events beginning at a very young age. And oftentimes, that complex trauma has an adult that is responsible for not protecting that child. And I want to be very, very careful, and I want to talk about this with compassion and empathy, but I want us today to just think about what can we do in our communities to help adults who have the capacity to help children so that they are not living with complex trauma. A traumatic event, it threatens the life or the physical integrity of a child or someone important to that child. We have to think about fear and the role that fear plays in the life of a child. I remember being in a school one day doing a group with a child, and I had my lesson plan, and I was following an evidence-based curriculum and felt really good about what we had planned for the day. But when he came in, he wasn't able to focus, and he wasn't able to catch anything that I was doing in terms of the activity. And so I just asked him what had happened. And the night before, he shared with me that his caregiver had been arrested, and he saw that happen, and he couldn't think or focus on anything else that day. And so what I love about trauma-informed approaches are that we train people to always be ready to change what they have planned and instead really treat someone by meeting them where they're at, treating them in a way that we say, okay, let's today let you process that, and let's help you talk about the fear and what you are thinking about so that you can again focus on school. Traumatic experiences can cause an overwhelming sense of helplessness. We want to empower individuals. We want to empower families. We want to empower our adults to find a way for children to live in safe environments where the trauma is no longer present. And traumatic experiences also experience, as we know, physical effects within our body, such as pounding heart rate, rapid breathing, and it can even go as far as loss of bladder or bowel control. Failure to provide for the basic needs in children who depend on those adults for their survival can also impact the child attachment. We know that reactions vary widely. I love resiliency theory. We know that our children can be very resilient. But I want to highlight this the last portion of this slide, that based on the child's level of exposure to trauma, access to supportive caregivers, and previous history of traumatic events, those things make a difference in how that child will continue to develop and how that child will turn into an adult. Children really are our future. And I think we have to really continue. And I know that those of you on this call are doing that. Continue to talk about not only the impact of trauma, but the importance of stopping the trauma so that our children can really thrive and grow up to be exactly who they were created to be. Trauma's impact on the developing, as I shared earlier, does affect attachment, trouble with relationships, boundaries, empathies, and social isolation is part of our definition of attachment. Also, our physical health. Also, our emotional regulation can impact dissociation, our cognitive ability, our self-concept, and our behavioral control. Cook has an excellent article on that. I don't want to read to you, but I'd like to just sit here and pause and let you look at this slide. I really want the end of our workshop today to really be focused on action and things in our community that are already happening, that are making a positive impact on children. So as you look at that, I want you to think about what you're seeing right now that is helping in terms of protective factors so that the child has some ability to have a lesser impact of trauma. Did a lot of work as a licensed clinical social worker on the self-concept, helping children understand that they are valuable, that they are capable, that they have these strengths. And I love that we're doing that. Behavioral control, the last one, doing a lot of work in the schools. I'm so thankful for all of these, the funding that has gone towards helping our children with behavioral challenges in the school setting. I just want us to do more. This slide, I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but it's a great visual of the impact of trauma on our developing brains, on our children's developing brains. Again, I just want to give you some time to look at that. Several years ago, I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Thought it was groundbreaking. Excellent. Later on, I read a book called Restoring the Shattered Self. It was a therapist's guide to helping individuals with complex trauma. There are other good resources out there. I don't know about you, but a little complicated to me. And so I want us to be able, and so the way that I know to best do that is just to help people understand that your heart starts racing, you feel that need for flight. Maybe you're walking out to your car and it's dark and you're not sure if you're safe, and that internal gut tells you something is not right. That's just the beginning feeling of what a child feels when the trauma is not just a threat to what their safety might be, but when they actually don't feel like they're safe. And so to understand that when that happens over and over and over again because of the chemicals, the cortisol, right, that gets dumped into the system, that there is this impact in their body that they have no control over. And that is why I think if people understand that, they would be more apt to do what they can to stop that, or don't have to experience that feeling over and over again. So as we look to care for a young child's brain, we know how critical it is that we provide children with a safe environment, good nutrition, regular medical care, that we ensure that a child has a warm, caring relationship with adults, that we recognize each child's uniqueness, talk, read, and sing to a child every day. We encourage safe exploration and play, that we have routine life so that things are predictable, that we use discipline to teach. We tell our children what we want them to do. And then we affirm when they do those things correctly. And that we limit TV and video time. And this is not a workshop to talk about that, but I do believe that we need to focus a lot on helping parents limit that TV and video time. I am at a conference right now and received the 2023 Kids Count data book yesterday. And I thank IYI for their work here and all that is done. And as you look through the data, and I encourage you to do that for your own county, that we are doing some things much better, but we still have a long way to go. What I received a couple days ago shows that on a national profile, fourth graders not proficient in reading is worse. And I don't want to go too far into that data, but if we could just encourage people to every day hold a child in their lap and read to that child once a day, one book a day. I really believe that would really multiply in many ways to solving some of the challenges that we see our children facing even down the road as they enter school and start to learn themselves how to read. If you want to build a strong platform for healthy development and effective learning in the early years, then we must pay as much attention to children's emotional well-being and social capacities as we do to their cognitive abilities and academic skills. That's a direct quote from Schonghoff in his article from 2006. I share that with you because I just told you about academic skills being important, and they truly are, and how important it is that our children develop academically. In those early years, our 0 to 3 years, if we can help people focus on the child's emotional well-being, their social capacities, without a device in their hand, interacting and being loved, what a difference we would see in their lives. This is again another quote. Trauma induces changes in the brains that can result in varying degrees of cognitive impairment and emotional dysregulation that can lead to a host of problems, including difficulty with attention and focus, learning disabilities, low self-esteem, impaired social skills, and sleep disturbances. There are so many excellent articles out there. I just looked this morning at a blog post that said all of the same information very clearly. As I think about action, my first thought was if we just could have just a lovely sheet. This is the national profile for economic well-being and education on children. And on the back, it talks about health and family and community. What if we had just a sheet like this on trauma's impact on the developing brain? Very simple, again, layman's terms that just helps people to understand that what happens to Johnny today, whether Johnny feels safe, or whether Johnny feels like fleeing, that his fight and flight have kicked in so many times that he just cannot calm his system down enough to regulate and focus and pay attention. If we could help people understand this, I do believe we would start to see some positive changes in the lives of our children. I love Josh Shipp's work about one child at a time. I don't have the answers. It's easy to see the challenges when you work with children and family, but I think about just the impact if we all just had one child that's not biologically ours, and we focused on changing the life for that one child. The ripple effects from that as we go forward would be just astounding. I want to talk a little bit about the ACE. I was with someone last evening and they're like, oh, you know about the ACE? And I think sometimes in our world, it's like, we think that everyone does. But the ACE is an assessment tool. It's a measure of traumatic experiences that examines the relationship between adverse childhood experiences and adult health and social outcomes. It's actually based on a large study. And I think that as I looked at all of that, it was several years ago. It was quite discouraging in a lot of ways, because the impact to one's health way down the road, as because of exposure to childhood trauma, is again somewhat discouraging. And so helping people understand that and being preventative and proactive, because once you read that, if your ACE score is a 4, it's like, am I
Dr. Gossreads, are you still there? I think we might have lost her.
But the higher your ACE score is, the higher your risk of suffering from psychological or medical problems. It's teaching a class of college students a few years ago, maybe 5, and I heard this information and it had them take the ACE, and then I had them there was no name attached, there was no identifying information, but had them pass their assessment around. We mixed them all up so nobody knew whose was whose. And so they then were holding just the score of someone in the class. And then I would have them stand up if the score was above a 4, the score was, a 5, 6. And what I used that for was to help them understand that sometimes it's easy to look around the room and think that no one else, have a score that would be that high, or the number would be small. But it was sad and I guess somewhat shocking that there was the number of people standing up. And so I share that with you to say we could just do a better job of helping children not experience things that would cause their ACE score to be that high. Again, I wanted today to share resources with you. This is an excellent one on screening for ACE and trauma. Trauma in childhood is a grave psychological, medical, and public policy problem that has serious consequences for its victims and for society. Again, a quote from DeBellis and Zisk. So the big question is, how do we stop the trauma? And I'm here to tell you, I don't have the answer to that. I gave you a couple of ideas that are in my mind, but we have to work on this at the micro, the meso, and the macro level. There's an excellent hand on a call to action. I want to share that link with you as well. I also want to talk, I want to go right back to that whole notion of rating a book. Nurturing and respond relationships build a healthy brain structure and a strong foundation for learning health and behavior. It's easy to talk about all the things that we see that we're concerned about. The children who we work with, and we wonder how we help them have a chance, how we help them be resilient and come through, able to function and do okay. Those are the kids that are on my mind most of the time. But I have to stop and remind myself that there are many children that are having these nurturing and responsive relationships and a healthy brain structure. And I am so thankful for that and for their families. And we're all busy and there's not a lot of time. But I'm so impressed with those families that not only have the ability to do that for their own children, but to another child. We, again, just had one child that was our responsibility that we did that for. What a difference we could make. Babies with strong positive emotional bonds to caregivers have consistently lower levels of cortisol in their brains. If people understood just that simple statement, I think it would help them try to make sure their child has less exposure to trauma. I love 0 to 3. I use their resources that free, available online. Great information for you to share in your communities or to access it. And maybe a lot of you already are. There's free continuing education on trauma. I wanted to include the link for that as well. Another excellent resource. We could go to some of these resources. I could click on them and we could look at this together. But what I want to do is allow some time to use the chat. I when I agreed to do this, I had no idea there would be so many people that signed up. And so I envisioned an interactive workshop. And so I'd love to see if we can create that in this setting. Again, just want to share these resources. Of course, you'll have access to them. But Josh, do you want to help us out with the chat and try to get some interaction going in the half hour that remains?
Sure. There was a couple of really good comments recently. Peggy said, I'm with CASA. I just learned that the parent education provided during an open CHINS case does not require learning about trauma-informed care. I would like to see this subject added to the requirements for all of these families. And then there was some follow-up conversation about that. So I thought that was a good one. There has been a question that's come through from Rebecca, and she is asking if you have any advice for how to introduce parents to these concepts, especially since her main role is not to provide therapy or parenting education. So when it's not part of their direct job, what advice do you have for introducing the concept to parents?
Yeah, I love that question because I have to tell you, when I was working as a therapist, I could only see so many people in a day, right? We know we have a shortage of providers. And so I believe this is a call to action for all of us. I don't see this as a call to action to our therapists as much as our therapists being able to share with everyone, our whole community of people, that it will take all of us to stop the trauma. I don't, additional master's level therapist, and I think we're doing all we can with that, but it's everyone understanding, right? That our neighbors, Sunday school teachers, our CASAs. I love that statement. How do we get trauma-informed information, simple trauma-informed information, into the hands of people? Again, I want to repeat, as a therapist, you and I, if you're a therapist, we can help recover from trauma, but complex trauma. I at this point don't have the tools to do that, and they exist. If it's repeated, I'd love to hear additional people in the chat talking about what's going on. And we can look all through the data book. We can go through all this information together. It's incredible stuff. And it gives us this urgency of the work still yet to do. and it helps us feel better about some of the progress that we've made in terms of well-being of children. But what are you specifically doing in your community, or what is someone doing that you see working, that's been going well?
Anne sent an idea to the chat. And she said that some teachers will send a letter home telling parents to send a note saying, essentially, handle with care if a child has experienced something traumatic and is having trouble coping. So just making sure parents are informed, and maybe even including resources around trauma-informed care in that communication home.
I love that. I think that's an excellent. Can you repeat that again? What I want everyone to do today is just to hear those good ideas and then think about, can I implement that somehow in the community?
Yep. So that one was some teachers will send a letter home just informing or telling parents to quote unquote handle with care if a child has experienced something traumatic or something traumatic happened at school. There was a couple more. For those in Fort Wayne, you can get this information from Park Center and Bowen Center. Therese said, I think some DCS offices are starting to provide TBRI training information to families. There is a question from Alan. He's asking if you can talk a little bit about generational trauma and what are some things that can be done to break that cycle.
Yeah, such an excellent question. You know, I personally liked Ruby Payne's work on generational poverty. I remember learning that and it making just a whole lot of sense to me. And at that point, I was practicing as a licensed clinical social worker. My caseload was children in the Department of Child Services system. So I was a home-based therapist in a program, and our clients were DCS clients and clients on probation. And my executive director had been in the field for many, many, many years. And I remember her one day saying to me, Lori, I had that person's grandma as my client. It just reminded me of what I'm trying to say today. You know, that this idea of stopping the trauma just didn't come to my thought. All thought it to yesterday, right? This came from years of seeing the cycle, hearing about the cycle that wasn't broken. And now I have Johnny in my office. And what could we have done 20 years prior with Johnny's mom, or 40 years prior with Johnny's grandma or grandpa, to stop the trauma, and that Johnny then wouldn't have needed to be in my office. And so I think we have to focus on what we can do right now, which is educating people that generational trauma can be stopped. Just because it's always done that way in the family system doesn't mean it has to be done that way going forward, because we have new information. Again, I'm at a conference right now, and it just the speed with which our world is changing is again, I don't know, astounding is the only word I can think of. It's maybe a little scary even. But the good of that is that we have information now that Johnny's mom and Johnny's grandma and grandpa didn't have. I'm 56. I don't know that anybody knew when I was an elementary school student the impact of trauma on a developing brain. But now we do. And so we take the information that we have today, and through relationships, as we build trust with these families, as we help these families understand that we are for them, we want the best for them, we want to help them. When we can get that inroad in, then we have this window with which we can share this information. Again, there's so many excellent resources. I don't think it's a lack of knowledge right now. I think it's the ability to get that knowledge into the homes of, into the hearts of these families, who I think will do better when they know better, and I think will make those changes with the right support. We could continue to talk about the impact of this on teachers, our children that are going into schools, and the impact of trauma that our teachers are having to try to work with within their classrooms, right? The problem is big. I don't think the solutions are simple, but I think one action at a time, one change at a time.
Yep. There are a couple comments in the chat that I thought were worth following up with. Generational trauma can be difficult because trauma is so ingrained in the family systems that family members often don't even recognize that they themselves have experienced trauma.
Sure.
And so, it just feels normal. And then
Yes.
someone mentioned that they adopted 2 girls a few years ago that had some severe trauma. And as a parent, what really helped was just informing teachers, having conversations with teachers and educators about what their triggers are, just so that everyone was sort of on the same page with that. And then we do have a couple more questions that came in. Kelsey asked, do you have recommendations for next steps after having families complete the ACE questionnaire? As an administrator, I want to be very intentional before asking families to share such personal information.
Yeah, that's right. I really believe that information is good just for our own self-awareness. But the truth is, if the ACE score is 8, the person can't go back and undo all of those experiences. And I like it as a tool. I like it more as a preventative tool, right? A tool to say, okay, your child's 2. If your child experiences these things, look at this ACE assessment. If your child experiences these things, your child will have an ACE score of 7, 8, 9 in the future. And we know that if a person has an ACE score number that is high, that there are negative impacts well into that child's adulthood, right? And throughout the life cycle of that individual. So how do we use that information to help people prevent the ACE score of the child of being high? Now, once it's there, once we know it's high, I like positivity. And so to really focus on the negative of what could be for that person, I don't like to spend a lot of time there, but to instead focus on, okay, how do we make sure that there's no, to the best of our ability, no additional trauma going forward. There's some trauma that we can't prepare for, right? Or, violent attacks that come out of nowhere. I know that we can't prevent all trauma, but it's that trauma that's happening within the home. We haven't talked yet about addiction. I think that we have to talk about how we help people with addiction so that they can understand that right now that addiction has a hold on them, but it's not just impacting them. That addiction is impacting the development of their child's brain if the child is experiencing an environment in which he or she is not having safety.
Yep. Akeem asked, how would you go about helping a child build resilience, especially when it comes to emotions? I know most children don't know much about labeling feelings at the elementary age, but he tries to encourage different ways of communicating them and expressing. He said he has a specific student or youth that he works with that has a tendency to isolate himself, walk away, and he's trying to help him understand and regulate emotions. Do you have any advice for that specifically? Yeah. Oh, he's 9, around 9,
yeah,
9 years old.
Yeah, I love that question. So I used to do groups in the setting, and I used to really struggle with how do I help a child with coping skills, right? I try to come up with like just a cute way of teaching that, or a way of using the word, the letter COP. Like, what can I do to make it sink in? How do I even define that in a way that a 9-year-old gets it? And I think you're absolutely right. Part of it is helping the child identify the feeling, right? So the child understands this is what I'm feeling. But then we have to help that child move to coping skills. So what's going to help that child then regulate? Helping that child self-regulate. I know we spent the beginning of this saying that trauma can impact self-regulation. We know that. but we've got 9-year-old child in front of us, and regardless of what that child has experienced prior to the moment, child now has to cope, has to find a way to regulate. I'm a big proponent of sensory. I like having children say to me, what is it that helps you feel calmer? What is it that makes your body go from that feeling of flight, I've got to get out of here, I've got to react, to being able to breathe, right? Being able to attune, being able to be present in the moment. For some kids, you know, it is deep pressure, it is jumping on a trampoline. I know sometimes you can't do all that in a school setting. I know all that, but is it squeezing a ball? Are there things I can do where I just squeeze my own hands? What can I do? What can I think about if I'm this 9-year-old child and all of a sudden my thoughts have went to something and I'm instantly mad and I want to react? What can I do to self-calm so that I can stay in this moment? Identifying feelings, I think, is very, very important. And then knowing what I can do, what is appropriate then to do, and an action, even though I'm feeling, maybe my feeling hasn't changed, but what can I do with an action to help me come back to the present and be able to then behaviorally do what's expected of me at that time. And I think the question also has something to do with resilience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, resiliency factors we know have a lot to do with support. So what kind of support is there for that 9-year-old outside of the support that you can give? You know, is there in a school setting a place where the child can go? Is there, you know, what are the supports outside of that school setting? Is there a Kids Hope person in the child's life? Is there an uncle? Is there after school program? What can we do to make sure that the child has a lot of protective factors, right? I see those as buffers that can help that child become more resilient. Who believes in that child? Who is saying to that child, I know things can be really difficult at home, but I know that you are really smart. I know that you are really good at being kind to others. I really like the way that you help others when you're done with your task. I'm so passionate about this because I have seen the difference that teachers can make, that aides can make, that our cafeteria workers can make, that our bus drivers can make when they let Johnny know, Johnny, I think you are really capable and I believe in you.
Yeah, just a couple of follow-ups there. There's been a lot of commentary about positive opinions around requiring trauma-informed care for different parties that are not currently required.
Yeah.
Charity had a suggestion. There are a lot of games and books available for teaching kiddos how to identify emotions. Once they identify what they're feeling, they can learn how to cope. A couple book suggestions, What Happened to You, which is by Bruce Perry, that talks about trauma on the brain. And then A Little Spot of Emotions books are so great and helpful for younger kids to learn and understand all of the different emotions they feel. And I'll just put a plug in for at our Kids Count conference last year, we had someone that presented on video games and how there are video games out there that are specifically made to help kids and youth better understand their own emotions. So there are a lot of resources out there in this arena.
Yeah.
And then Nanette also said more family resources and counseling programs embedded into preschool curriculum. So making sure that we are bringing trauma-informed care all the way to early childhood pre-care. And then Camilla said co-regulation. We will do this together in the beginning and then move to self-regulation after much practice. And then Peggy asked a question. Do you have any suggestions as to whom I can contact in reference to changing DCS policy? So there's been a conversation in the chat about DCS policy, and right now it currently doesn't require trauma-informed care. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that question. I think that my answer would be to look at who your legislator is and send those ideas. I just, again, am at a conference in have got this information, Policy Lovers for Preventing Child Maltreatment. So I think that we have to know from you. I talked about being on the front lines for many, many years, but I'm not anymore. So I was a licensed clinical social worker for 26 years. I directed a school-based program. I did many, many, many hours in school settings, but I am not in those environments anymore. But those of you are, your legislator needs to hear from you as to what you think would be beneficial. What are you seeing that could be impacted by policy that could make a difference? I think training is critical. I've also had people say to me, like, okay, I have the knowledge, I've been trained, but what's the next step? I think training is an important piece of that. But again, I think that getting the knowledge into the hands of those that are maybe causing the trauma, getting knowledge in the hands of those that are caring for our children and maybe not understanding that this event is not just a one-time event, but the impact within that child's body continues long after the violence has stopped.
Yep. Kind of speaking to that, there was a comment from Rebecca, and she said, personally, I found that understanding this information helps me understand my own childhood experiences and how they influence my behavior as a parent. This has been more helpful than just learning about parenting strategies or what you should and shouldn't do as a parent.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I've shifted a little bit. When I was a new therapist, I spent a lot of time talking with people about childhoods, and I love EMDR and good things that we are doing to help people deal with their own trauma. I do believe that with intervention, we see positive help. But what about all these families that aren't choosing to go to intervention, right? These families that aren't seeing therapists. Right? Is there a way to get this information into their hands, that this just becomes common knowledge? Not that you need an expert to teach it to you, but that we all just in our everyday language start understanding that for kids, right? That especially 0 to 5, that this trauma is impacting the brain in a way that all the therapy in the world can't go away.
Yep. Camilla offered a resource. Child Mind Institute is very involved in childhood trauma and legislation, and are readily prepared to send letters. So that's a resource that you can use.
Excellent.
Ann Bailey had a comment regarding the CHINS, the CHINS cases. Since many parents have to have parent training and domestic violence work, maybe we need to see if service providers are also including this info. So a good thought there. We have just a few more minutes. Dr. Goss-Reeves, do you have any final thoughts, any final calls to action as we start to wrap up here?
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for being here. I had no idea so many people would sign up, and I just want to thank you for caring about this topic. I want to thank you for being willing to spend your time and your resources not only studying this and equipping yourself with the knowledge, but then taking that forward. And in the sphere where you have influence, speaking up on behalf of those children. We talked earlier about Generation 1 that was in the life of Johnny, that had an inroad into the conversation with, or the space with Johnny's parents, where they would even be willing to listen, to say, you know what, I care about you, I want to help you. This is what I learned about the way that trauma impacts Johnny. How do we help? We know that you love Johnny, right? I really believe, as I worked with families, I really believe that the parents love their children. And I really believe that people do better when they know better. And so how do we come alongside people in a way that says, I want to help you do better? Meeting those needs, right? Our Maslow's hierarchy of needs, meeting those basic needs so that someone can even begin to think about the impact of trauma, that their basic needs are met, that they do have food and shelter and clothing and access to the basic needs, so that we can begin to talk to them about this emotional impact on the child's brain that we know really matters.
Yep. Thank you so much, Dr. Gosreeves. And so I'm just going to go through a couple of slides here to finish up, and then we'll get you back to your day. So as a reminder, a copy of this presentation PowerPoint can be found in the link that Aaron put in the chat. It'll also be emailed to you after. To receive the latest updates and opportunities, including more webinars that we have once a month, please consider signing up for our newsletter. That's at iyyi.org/newsletters. Additionally, we are so excited to announce our Kids Count Conference, November 14th and 15th. It is official. The registration is officially open, and we are so excited that our keynote is Bill Nye the Science Guy. So we're super excited about that. In addition, we'll have anywhere between 55 and 65 really intense workshop sessions. So please visit our website to learn more. Please consider coming. We'd love to see everyone there. Additionally, we have a couple of webinars coming up. September 20th, The Kids Are Not Okay, Youth Suicide in Indiana. And then October 18th, we have Youth Worker Wellbeing in Indiana, A New Approach. So there should be 2 really interesting webinars that we'd love to see you on. And then additionally, we have our professional development grants. You are able to apply at any time. They are awarded in different grant periods. The next one will be October, December, February, April, and June. Those are up to $750 for continuing education. So IYI has just a ton of professional development opportunities for you. But if there's something that we don't provide, we want to help you get access to that as well. And so as we conclude, I just want to thank all of the attendees who joined us today. We had a really big group today for a really important topic. We appreciate your impact, and we value your voice and the choice you made to learn and partner with IYI today. Soon you will receive an email with the link to complete the evaluation of this webinar. Please take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about today's presentation. If you don't receive the evaluation email, please check your junk email, as it may have been directed there. And then as a reminder, when you complete the evaluation, you will be redirected to your certificate of completion. So I know that certificate is important for some folks and their employers. And so with that, that concludes our presentation. And on behalf of Indiana's youth, thank you so much for showing up today and showing up every day for Indiana youth. Thank you.
Thank you all.